part 2 of our series of studies on the Sabbath. This one will be titled Calling the Sabbath a Delight. Calling the Sabbath a Delight. Jacob, can you pull the plug on that right there? Okay. That should help me with my slides, hopefully. All right. So we decided we were going to go through and methodically try to understand everything we can about the Sabbath so that if it applies today, we know how to apply it. And what we concentrated on last week, and we'll continue on with it this week, is number 1, what was the Sabbath and how was it observed in Old Testament times? So just a few notes of things we learned from last week. Keeping the Sabbath day, we know, was the 4th commandment. It wasn't the 4th suggestion or the 4th principle. It was a commandment. No work was to be done on the Sabbath day for thou, your son, your daughter, your servants, or your animals, and even the stranger that was in the land, okay? And this was instituted by God not only to give mankind rest from hard labor, working 6 days, but also to rest from worldly pursuits. It was a day of rejuvenation, a day to separate yourself from normal worldly cares, anxieties, stresses, troubles, and all those kinds of things. So keeping the Sabbath was also a safeguard. We found out it was a safeguard for all people, in that if you were a business owner or you're somebody who had servants, you were not allowed to make them work 7 days, without a day of rest. You were mandated to give your servants a day of rest, which is a very good thing, because you could imagine if there were no restrictions on your master telling you how many days to work, they could very well just say, hey, we got a lot of stuff that needs to get done. We got deadlines to meet. You're going to work 7 days a week until we get this done. And everybody knows that's not enjoyable. It's not healthy, and it's not moral even. It's not moral. The Sabbath day was to be kept not just as a day of rest, but God says that we were to keep it holy as God kept it holy and set it apart at creation. So keeping it holy is there's a little bit more to it than just, I'm going to lay on the couch all day and rest my body, my weary limbs, okay? Because that isn't the ultimate rest. That's not where we find our ultimate rest. Now, maybe an animal would find rest that way, but a human being made in the image of God finds rest in thinking about the things of God as you pause from your normal day-to-day cares and worries of life. Keeping the Sabbath, we found out that God used the Sabbath as a test for Israel to see if they would walk in his entire law or not. Okay, we read that whole chapter. I believe it was Exodus chapter 16, where the manna fell on 6 days and it didn't fall on the 7th. God says, I'm going to test my people whether they will keep my law or no. So it's a sign of obedience, a test of obedience. Keeping the Sabbath is also a test of faith. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, you have to have faith to believe that you can take a day of rest and God will still provide for you the things that you need, versus saying, hey, it's a Sabbath day today. I gotta pay the bills. I gotta work this day because this is the only day I can do it. You gotta have faith to believe that God will bless the work that you do in your other 6 days, that you don't need that to endlessly work and toil just to survive. Keeping the Sabbath was a sign between Israel and God to let other nations know that Israel, they were God's people. They served the Creator rather than the gods of endless productivity like they had served in Egypt. And the Sabbath also was, we got a whole bunch of things that it is. A lot of people just think of it as a day of rest, but as you can see, there's a lot of things that the Sabbath is. The Sabbath was a gift from God to his people. In other words, it was a gift to them. Think about the Israelites when they left Egypt. There was no Sabbath day. Their taskmasters made them work 7 days a week around the clock. They may have fed them food, enough food to eat and all that, but they made them work. So God gave them the gift of, hey, you can have this day off. This is a gift from me to you. And not only was it a gift, but it was a day to celebrate freedom, a day to celebrate being released from the bondage of the gods of Egypt into the freedom that God and ultimately Christ would offer us. The Sabbath was also a day to honor God. We call it, and we're going to get more into this as we get through this series, Christians today call it the Lord's Day. The Lord's Day and the Sabbath are equivalent to one another because it is a day to honor God. And we found out at the end, we found out how serious God took the Sabbath in the Old Testament, that a man that would be caught willfully violating the Sabbath was to be punished with capital punishment, with the death penalty. And some people have a hard time with that, and obviously everybody does. What, just because you didn't stop and rest that day? But you think about this, a willful violator of God's law, let's just say the fourth commandment, is more dangerous than 10 murderers. And that is because if you're allowed to just willfully violate God's commandment, it'll spread throughout the nation and cause much more harm than what 10 murderers could accomplish to the nation. You could literally destroy the entire nation if that kind of willful disobedience was allowed to continue on. All right, so a lot of stuff about the Sabbath that unfortunately we don't hear too much of these days. You just hear that it's a day of rest, and that's about as far as it goes. All right, so we're going to go to Isaiah. We're going to start out in Isaiah chapter 58, verse 13. And like I said, the title of the study is to delight in this. The Sabbath is a day of delight. It's not a day of, it's not a burdensome day where, oh no, now I got to give the Lord a day of my time. That kind of a thing. 58 verse 13. Isaiah 58 verse 13, God says this, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, okay, call it a delight versus, it's a burden, can't do what I exactly want to do, I can't do another day of work, all that kind of stuff. The holy of the Lord, honorable, and shall honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. Okay, I'm going to go to the next verse and then we'll circle back here. Whoops, I went too many. Then, if you do all those things, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. So if you practice and observe the Sabbath like that, God says, and you view it as a delight, I will make you ride on high above all the people of the earth. In other words, I'm going to bless you beyond measure. You're going to have everything you need. Now let's go back and dissect this a little bit. All right, turn away thy foot. What does that mean? Well, back in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, unnecessary travel was forbidden on the Sabbath day. In other words, you wouldn't walk 50 miles on the Sabbath day to get to your next destination so you can do business on the first day or whatever it was. So there were actually, Jesus even says it in the book of Matthew. He says that he's talking about the end times, and if you're in Jerusalem when the Antichrist gets there, the abomination is there. Jesus literally says, pray that your flight be not in the winter. And the reason why you wouldn't want your flight to be in the winter, because it's difficult to travel when it's cold and wet and rainy. And he also said, pray that your flight be not on the Sabbath day, because you're not supposed to travel your normal that you would your other 6 days. You're not supposed to travel very far on the Sabbath. Okay, so there were restrictions as far as traveling goes. Now we go to this doing thine own pleasure. This is the tough one. This is the tough one, because the Sabbath can easily turn into being the day of the Lord to my day. This is my day, right? And we'll get into that later on, because people will pull a scripture from the New Testament where Jesus says that God made the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath. But that's been twisted into thinking this is a day of recreation, a day of personal pleasure, a day of finding all of your own ways. Okay, was supposed to be a day that, I mean, literally, you view God as, if you could view God as being here in person, how would you celebrate the day if he was here in person? Would you ignore him by doing something totally different than thinking about him or paying attention to him? If he were here in person and we did that, and he said, hey, I want you to meet me here on this day once every 7 days, and we can fellowship, we can talk, we can enjoy each other's company. But now all of a sudden you say, no, I got something else I want to do. But I'm resting because I'm not doing my normal work, but I want to climb mountains today. Or I want to bike. I want to complete my 30-mile bike ride or something like that. And for those of us that have kids in youth sports, it makes us think deep and hard about all the traveling that we do on the Lord's Day, running from place to place, not finding rest, thinking that you have to be there. If you're not there on that day, that somebody's missing out on something. So it becomes a very hard thing in this generation because of our society, our nation no longer observes the Sabbath as a whole. So we're left with these very difficult decisions. What do we do? Do we honor God? Do we find our own pleasure? And some would say, well, I mean, think about it this way. When God says he made the Sabbath, and we'll get into this more in depth another day, when he says he made the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, turning it into a complete day of recreation or something like that versus a day where you're fellowshipping, studying, hearing the word of God taught, sharing meals with other Christians. When God says he made the man or the Sabbath for man, not man for the Sabbath, he didn't mean that it was a day that we could just do whatever we desired, because that's not what's good for us, okay? What he means is if we observe the Sabbath as he intended, it is for our benefit, for our good. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees, like I said, we'll get into this in a later study, made the Sabbath so burdensome that the people couldn't enjoy the rest, couldn't enjoy that. But we've somehow got this idea that since the scribes and Pharisees, or the Pharisees, were always attacking Christ and calling him a Sabbath breaker, we somehow think that the Sabbath now is not important because Jesus was a Sabbath breaker. But Jesus was not a Sabbath breaker. He was only breaking their extra man-made laws that they were trying to institute that had become a burden to the people, so they couldn't enjoy the Sabbath. Jesus literally kept the Sabbath to the T. And so it's interesting that we've come to associate the Sabbath with Phariseeism. When Jesus was, the Pharisees broke the Sabbath, but Jesus kept it. We'll get into that another time. So God says the Sabbath is not your day; it's His day. Okay, and that is very interesting, because some people they'll start understanding. Okay, we really do need a rest from work. Okay, I totally get that. I can deal with that. I have no problem with that. I will take every seventh day off, and I'll relax, and I'll go fishing, I'll go hunting, I'll do all this other stuff. And then ultimately they're still not finding the rest that they need, because they're not observing the Sabbath as God intended. Okay. So now he goes on and he says this, nor speaking thine own words. Now this, if literally, if you really want to know the definition of this, what the Sabbath day is, without all kinds of extra requirements and laws, if you fulfill the spirit of this verse, you will be good. You will be observing it, okay? But not speaking thine own words. What does that mean? Well, hey, let's say you get together and let's say everybody's celebrating the Sabbath in, I'll say Old Testament times, because we haven't got to the point of how we observe it today, right? Let's say you go there and you're talking to you go to church, you make it there, and or you're at a Sunday dinner and you're talking to other Christians, and then all of a sudden you just start talking about your business and business dealings, okay? That's speaking your own words. Or I know for our family, sports is really huge for us. I'm trying to not get us, when we're sitting around talking, I'm trying to direct the conversation to something other than, hey, how you guys doing in hockey today? Or your next game, the next week, we got a big week coming up ahead. Because now I'm turning the day into us at the center and everything revolving around that. And it's supposed to be God at the center and us revolving around everything that God desires. We have 6 other days to do all that stuff, right? We have 6 other days to do all that. So it's not like God is really putting us in bondage here. Oh my gosh. I will say this, actually. The Sabbath is a very beautiful thing if you truly understand it, because it sets you free from the bondage of this world. In that, it helps you every 7 days. It'll help you reset your life. Because think about it, no matter how devout of a Christian you are, I don't care if you get up and you pray every morning and every night, this world is still a hard place. There's a lot of temptations, and our desires can deceive us at times. We think we're doing a good thing. But once that Sabbath comes around, it's like I'll say it this way. Your computer program, now some computers are getting better these days. It hasn't happened too much with mine. But I remember in the early days of the Windows operating systems, of the computers, you would always run into some kind of a glitch. Well, the first thing you would do is you'd power off the computer and turn it back on. It was a reset. It would reset that's what the Sabbath does for us. So if we're kind of getting drawn to our, making idols out of things that we think are good endeavors, the Sabbath will help us reframe our mind. You stop thinking about that for a little bit, and then you reset, and then you properly balance out your life. So it's just a way to get yourself balanced out continuously on a weekly basis. So it's a blessing that way. It sets you free. It's a recovery from the world. I mean, like I said, the world and worldly pursuits can be very deceptive. And when you take that rest, it sets you free, and it actually is a day of celebration. You feel that deep inner joy by ceasing from the cares of this world. Then he goes on, he says, thine own pleasure. We talked a little bit about that. And we're going to find out all throughout history of Western Christian civilization, thine own pleasure, they considered this to be interpreted recreations, amusements, and sports even. Now that's a tough one for our family, because I think high school and school sports, if I'm not mistaken, they used to be this way. They didn't have sports on Sunday, so it's easy. But it's when you get into youth traveling, there always seems to be something. Well, part of my family's there right now as we're struggling to figure out how we're going to observe the Sabbath, because there's a championship game this morning. Okay. And I'm not knocking on that. I'm not knocking on the other part of my family that's gone, because this is kind of new to us. And I feel like we're learning the truth of this and learning what we've been missing. Sabbath isn't a burden. Remember, God says, call it a delight. He actually wants to give us something that's good for us versus something that is taking something away from us. But that does come at, you do have to sometimes separate yourself from the cares of this life in order to observe it. You have to stop something, because you have to give something up in order to get something more. Okay. There was a really good Christian movie that we watched. It was this track coach that was teaching her track runners this principle. She was teaching them to their training where they were it was a gradual training program, right? Versus trying to do too much too fast. But her motto was, or her saying always was, and she was quoting a verse from the Bible, that in order to win, you first have to lose. In order to win, you first have to lose. You got to give something up, okay, in order to win, in order to gain something. And we as human beings, we never want to give up those idols in our heart, those things that we desire. We secretly want to just keep doing those things, while at the same time hoping that we're still pleasing God and thinking that we're doing everything to His will. The Sabbath is what we talked about, not doing thine own pleasure nor speaking thine own words. Well, Jesus says it this way: seek the kingdom of God first, and all these things will be added unto you. Part of the kingdom, obviously, is obeying His laws, obeying His commandments. All right. I'm going to end my commentary on this single verse, and we'll move on with a quote from a guy. Actually, I have it on the next slide, I think. If I can get there. Trust me, I'm working on it. I've been doing tests, and I can't figure out why this is doing that. I had it working. Oh, there we go. Verse 14. We read that. God said okay. First, I'll read through these real quick, and then I got another quote that I wanted to read. I found this book. It's a really interesting book. And I have it on our website under our free books tab. I'm going to pull a quote out here from page 259 of The Sabbath by Harmon Kingsbury from the year 1840. Okay, 1840. In America. He says, a number of persons appointed a certain Sabbath as a time to play at football. And I don't know if he means soccer or football. I don't know if they probably called soccer football back then, like they do in other countries. And while two of them were toiling a bell to call the company together, they were struck with lightning and both died. Okay. So we see here during these times in the year 1800s and so on, Americans observed the Sabbath day, and there were people that were trying to make it a day of recreation or amusement rather than the day of the Lord. And this account says that the people that were doing that were struck by lightning. Let me see. Another case from page 259. A pious minister in his sermon once spoke of the man in the camp of Israel who was stoned to death for gathering sticks upon the Sabbath. A thoughtless man present was offended, and to show his contempt, left the house and began to gather up sticks. When the congregation came out, they found the man dead with a bundle of sticks in his arms. So we're going to actually read that verse today. We talked a little bit about it last week. It seemed like a strict command of God to give somebody the death penalty for violating the Sabbath back then. But this guy heard this sermon. This was back in America's early days, was all mad and said, how could God do that? So in contempt, he leaves church, goes and gathers up sticks and says he can do that anyways. And then the congregation found him dead, laying there with a bundle of sticks in his hands. Interesting. We'll go to the next quote here. Says, let the degradation, the disgrace, and the last of the expulsion of the race of the Stuarts from the throne of Britain serve as a public warning to all Britons. For who in the least acquainted with the history of his country knows not that from the time when James the sixth of Scotland, the first of England, set himself to establish iniquity by a law, by instituting the Book of Sports. In England, for the Lord's Day, the judgments of heaven pursued that family with calamity upon calamity, till the line of princes in that house to lay claim to the throne of Britain is now no more. So this Book of Sports, it's interesting because this King James that he's talking about here, whose descendants eventually lost the throne of Great Britain, and it went over to another branch. He was the man that published the King James Bible. And so you would think, why would God punish a man that got the Bible, the Bible published? Well, you're going to find out by studying the book of Kings or the book of Chronicles, book of Samuel, book of Judges, any of those books, that there were leaders or kings that did good things, and then later on in their life, they did something bad and God punished them for it. So what this was, it's interesting. I got to do a little bit more research on it. I actually downloaded the book. I have the original book that he published. So later, after he had published the King James Bible, he published this book called the Book of Sports. And and at the time, I think there weren't any sports that were legal, in the 1600s to play on the Sabbath day. They outlawed that. Well, he wanted to come up with a list of sports that were acceptable and ones that weren't. The ones that weren't were like really bad ones, like dog fighting, stuff like that, or gambling over something. And then, so he thought it would be good to let people play sports after they had gone. And he was good in this respect. He said that he wanted the people to go to church in the morning, but to have a certain part of the day afterwards to play sports. And with good intentions, it sounds good, right? It's, it's still rest. They're not working. It's a good day to do that. But when you start looking into it deeper, obviously, you look at Isaiah, the scriptures we just read in Isaiah, and I'm like thinking, well, do you really, with playing a whole bunch of sports on the Sabbath day, is that really keeping the day holy, keeping it separate? Or what's that going to turn into? Well, it is viewed by this author and by others at the time, and the Puritans were very much against it. They actually burned this guy's books. Now, I'm not saying the Puritans were perfect, but if you study the history of America, you'll find out that we're here because of the Pilgrims, or because of the Puritans. The Puritans founded America. They were the first ones here. They came here for the express purpose of advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ and the kingdom of God and so forth. So they were very much against it because they thought that by saying you can do it part of the day, eventually the whole day was going to become corrupt. The whole day was going to become defiled. Now, I may ask that question today. What has happened to Sunday as being the Lord's Day, the Christian Sabbath? What's happened to it now for most people? It's usually a day of amusement, a day to either play or watch sports. And very little time, if any, is spent learning about the Word of God. In the old days, when people in America and all the way back, what would happen is people would join in public worship. They would hear a sermon preach or a Bible study. Then they would go home, and then they would talk about that with their family. And they would be unpacking it all and still continually dwelling upon that. And then maybe sharing a meal together. And then a lot of churches, some still do it today, where they even have an evening service. So it helps keep people in the right frame of mind. And other people will, like I plan to do later today, I'm going to go sit in my lazy boy chair and just read biblical books. Read biblical books and just enjoy it. I'm just going to read it for my enjoyment. I'm not going to read it with the intense purpose of taking all kinds of notes. I'm just going to read it and enjoy it and be outside, the fresh air. I'm not running back and forth, bringing people to hockey. I'm not doing that. And that's a beautiful rest room. To me, that's a delight. Where I can just do that. You're not feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to be tilling the garden. I'm supposed to be doing this, or it's a blessing to be able to do that. And you know what? The night before, last night, we call the Israelites did this as well. The day before the Sabbath, the sixth day, was called the day of preparation. It's interesting how hard you will work when you know you can't work the next day. You will get a lot more done on during the 6 days, minus the supernatural ability of God to just bless you. If you're looking at it purely from the standpoint of somebody who looks at numbers and logistics and production, people get more done when they know there's a deadline that they have to meet. And I think I brought this up last time. They found out, I was listening to something a few years ago on productivity and work and stuff like that. And they were saying that if the day before people go on vacation, they will get so much more work done than they would otherwise, because they want to make sure everything is in order while they're gone, and they don't want to worry about it anymore. Let's get as much done. Well, imagine doing that once a week, how much more productive you're going to be mentally. And when you get to that sunset, the Sabbath starts, what a joy it is. It's done. I just ran my race. I ran the week. Now I'm enjoying it. Anyways, so this is this Bishop Andrews says this about the Sabbath. This is kind of his interpretation of the verses we read in Isaiah. He says, to keep the Sabbath in an idle manner is the Sabbath of oxen and asses. Well, what does he mean by that? Well, because oxen and asses don't dwell upon the things of God, okay? So if all you do is rest on the Sabbath in an idle manner, you're really no different than your ox or your ass. You're not acting like somebody who was made in the image of God. You're acting like just an animal that needs physical rest. To pass it in a jovial manner is the Sabbath of the golden calf, when the people sat down to eat and drink and rose again to play. Do you guys remember that? After God delivered them from Egypt and they were resting out in the wilderness, and they decided to throw a big, huge drinking party and dancing and all that. And then they made the idol that, and so that was in excess, right? Excess. I don't think jovial, I wouldn't, a lot of people think jovial means you can't have joy. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about an excess manner of partying, okay? This would be like, hey, the Sabbath is here. Roll out the keg, man, and celebrate. No work today, okay? To keep it in surfeiting and wantonness is the Sabbath of Satan, the devil's holiday. Okay, surfeiting. This basically that means like what I had said earlier. Surfeiting means in excess. Surfeiting and wantonness means without any kind of discipline or order. You're just reveling it up. Okay. And so none of those ways of observing the Sabbath are the correct. And those are basically the three different ways that a lot of people, when they want to observe the Sabbath, will start with those first. Okay, so let's go to Amos chapter 8, verse 4, because there is this mentality. Okay, what is the opposite of looking at the Sabbath as a delight? Oh, it's a burden. It's keeping me from something. It's keeping me from me doing me. Okay, you do you type of, slogan. We got that today. You hear everybody say that, you do you, which is none other than a rephrasing of the statement of the famous Satanist that says, this is the sum of the law, do what thou wilt. Okay. Or we watched some movie, the kids we did on a family movie night, where there were these guys, chanting, we want to do whatever the hell we want, do whatever the hell we want. Anyways, so this is the mentality. Amos chapter 8, verse 4. Check this out. Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail. By the way, I'll say this, the Sabbath protected the poor from the rich, so that they wouldn't use them as abject slaves that were nothing but pieces of meat to make them rich. Amos 8:5 saying, this is what these guys say, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit. Okay, so these are the kinds of people that the new moon, back in the Old Testament, the new moon was also a holy day, the beginning of the month. And the Sabbath. So these guys hate the new moon. They hate the holy days, right? They hate God's days. They say, when is this day going to be over so we can get back to business as usual? Okay, so they're looking at this as a restriction upon them getting rich, getting wealthy, and performing all their business. So we'll see what God thinks about those kinds of people here in the next verse. Verse 6, that we may buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes, yea, and sell the refuse of the wheat. This is interesting. I don't want to go into this today, but the refuse of the wheat would be taking all of the good, healthy nutrients out of the wheat, all the whole grains, and then selling just the white part, white wheat. All right. The Lord hath sworn by the excellency of Jacob, surely I will never forget any of their works. Shall not the land tremble for this? And everyone mourn that dwelleth therein? And it shall rise up wholly as a flood, and it shall be cast out and drowned, as by the flood of Egypt. So God said that these people that looked at the Sabbath as a burden, and they couldn't wait for it to get over so they could pursue their own desires, he says, shall not the land tremble for this? And as I'm studying this Sabbath, trying to learn everything I can about it, because I don't want to leave any stone unturned this time around, because I've done that before, and I've gone back to my old ways and said, no, it's just if you're in Christ every day, you're Sabbathing, you're resting, okay? Another story for another time, but I've been finding out that historically every single nation that professed to be Christian, when the Sabbath became profaned, when it became just like another day, the rest of the nation fell apart with it. It's a cycle that you'll see repeatedly. The Sabbath goes away, and all of the morals of the nation go away. Then the leaders become corrupt, and the nation falls. And then it happens. Then you get another devout group of people. They're like, we got to get back to the commandments of God, because now we're living under the bondage of a new Pharaoh. Life sucks. It's hard. God, forgive us. Now we got to start it all over again. We have, like in America, we observe the Sabbath. Now all of a sudden, hey, no, it's a day of sports, recreation, this and that. Then now where are we at today? I mean, the Sabbath really is, I found out, is the measure of whether a nation is going to be morally sound or morally corrupt. Think about this. If you don't have a set time that everybody in your nation sets aside to worship God, to think about him, to study his word, when is that going to get done? If it's not a set time that we do, then it's going to eventually, the cares of this life, as Jesus said, is going to choke out the word and kill it. Okay, choke out the word and kill it in the parable of the sower. The cares of this life will always win over unless you draw a line and you say, no, not on this day. This is the Lord's day. This is not my day. The world doesn't own me. They don't control me. They don't make me feel like an oddball or weirdo, because the oddball and the weirdos are going to be the ones in the lake of fire come Judgment Day. But Satan would like to make us feel different and odd and uncool, because, we really do want to serve God, right? All right, Numbers chapter 15. We're going to skip back over here, and we're going to read this instance of this guy that broke the Sabbath and how God dealt with it. He says in verse 29, you shall have one law for him that sinneth through ignorance, both for him that is born among the children of Israel and for the stranger that sojourneth among them. This is interesting. I'm not going to go into this, but it is kind of interesting with this topic, because a lot of us have been fairly ignorant as to the Sabbath. Because you think in the back of our minds, we know it's one of the 10 commandments. We know it's the fourth commandment. But then most people are just like, okay, well, I understand the other 9. We can obey those. But the fourth commandment, for some reason, I think that might be different, or we might not have to do that. And so there were instances where God dealt with other people in the Old Testament. If they sinned through ignorance, it was a lesser punishment or a lesser thing that he would prescribe for them. And that was in the prior verses, if you want to go back to that. But I find it interesting that it's going to be the following verses are going to be about the Sabbath, okay? So there's difference between being ignorant and not knowing, and once you know, then there's no longer It's no longer sin and ignorance. Both for him that is born among the children of Israel and for the stranger that sojourneth among them. Verse 30. But the soul that doeth aught presumptuously. What does that mean? The soul that knows better, but says, I'm not going to obey. Okay, I know this is what you said, God, but I am not going to listen. Whether he be born in the land or a stranger, the same reproacheth the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. Because he hath despised the word of the Lord, and hath broken his commandment, that soul shall utterly be cut off. His iniquity shall be upon him. I do want to mention this in passing here. Now, the 10 Commandments we know were actually written with the finger of God on 2 tablets of stone, and they were placed in the Ark of the Covenant. Now, when you study the Bible and you realize you have, there's a tabernacle up there, a model of it, but you realize there's this temple and there's this outer court, there's this inner court, and then there's the holy place inside the temple, and then there's the Holy of Holies. And inside that Holy of Holies is the Ark of the Covenant, and inside the Ark of the Covenant is the 10 Commandments. Now you think about how holy these 10 Commandments are then, right? Because, I mean, there were rules and restrictions in Israel of getting into the outer court, inner court. I mean, you can't just go walk in there and go into the holy place, into the Holy of Holies, and dig your hand in the Ark of the Covenant without dying, okay? So the point is, God is showing us how important those 10 Commandments are. If they're in the Ark of the Covenant, that is the most... That was the most sacred place in the entire universe, okay, was the Ark of the Covenant. And to be inside those 10 Commandments that God wrote with his own hand. So what does that tell us? That in our own hearts, that should be what matters the most. That covenant, the 10 Commandments. Because he hath despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, his soul, okay, we read that. God said that soul's going to be cut off. Verse 32, and while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day. Notice how these things were placed right in a row. God's kept them. They're not just totally unrelated topics, okay? They all relate to each other. Just got done talking about obeying the commands and so forth. Verse 33, and they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation. And they put him in ward or prison, kept him in under guard, because it was not declared what should be done to him. And the Lord, now check this out, and the Lord said unto Moses, the man shall be surely put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. Now that is the verse that one guy heard his preacher talk about. And he's like, I'm not going to worship a God that does that. I'm going to go out and gather sticks. And this was in New Testament times, 100, 150, 200 years ago. And the guy was found dead. Coincidence? I don't know. So it was very serious to God. This 4th commandment was not something that was the bottom or an optional commandment. This was a non-optional commandment in the Old Testament, okay? And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died as the Lord commanded Moses. And the word, one more. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the border of their garments throughout their generations, that they may put upon the fringe of the borders a riband of blue. And it shall be unto you for a fringe, that you may look upon it and remember all, now check this out, remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. And that you seek not, see where this is? See where this goes here? Remember that verse we read about the Sabbath? You seek not after your own pleasure, your own ways, speaking not your own words. And that you seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, after that which you used to go a-whoring. Okay, that which you used to go a-whoring. All right? So God wanted the people, he had these fringes set up on their garments, so when they looked upon them, they remembered the commandments. Hey, let's do it God's way. Because now that's another thing. People will look at all of the commandments as a burden, right? As a burden. But like going back to the Sabbath, when God instituted the Sabbath, he knew what was good for us. Okay, he knew that practicing it the right way ultimately leads to our joy and happiness. And he knew violating it was going to always bring us into bondage. We're going to be serving some idol like they did in Egypt, and you probably don't even know it. I could tell you this. There's been times in my life where I thought I was studying the Bible every day, but the lack of understanding this commandment, I was probably in a form of idolatry and didn't realize it. That you remember and do all his commandments and be holy unto your God. Be pure, be holy. That's too much, right? That's too much. Can't do that for God. I mean, really, Jesus would never preach that, right? Be holy unto God. Have you ever read the Sermon on the Mount? It's actually more stringent than the law itself. In fact, Jesus says, I don't even want your thoughts to be negative towards your neighbor. There was the one, there was the time of, where he said, you have heard, Moses talked about you shall not murder in the 10 Commandments, but Jesus said, but I say unto you, whoever hates his brother in his heart without a cause is guilty of murder already. So it's not like Jesus came and made everything like that. Everybody's got this perception that Jesus was a hippie, right? Anything goes, man. Once saved, always saved. Just say the word and I'll snap my fingers and you're good to go and you can live however you want. No obedience. Obedience doesn't matter anymore. Obedience was something that was very difficult for those people back then, All right. In closing here, we're going to go over to Isaiah chapter 56. Isaiah 56 verse 2. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the Son of Man that layeth hold on it, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Our good friend King James thought he was doing a good thing on the Sabbath day, but literally he was opening up a can of worms to make the day about recreation and amusement versus being a day that we honored God and spent time in meditation and learning and enjoying fellowship of other Christians in spirit and in truth. So blessed is the man that doeth this, the Son of Man that layeth hold and keepeth it from polluting it, and keepeth his hand from doing any evil. So it's a blessing, right? Verse 3. Now, like I said, the blessing, a lot of times blessings come with first cutting something else out that we don't want to cut out, right? Verse 3, Jesus said this. You say, well, Pastor Ben, do you really mean all this stuff? Well, did Jesus really mean it when he said, take up your cross and follow me? It wasn't an easy thing to be a Christian, right? Take up your cross. There's sacrifice involved, right? Now, there's always these choices. Do we serve the world or do we serve God? And back here in the Old Testament, at least, it was a good mark. The guy that you knew who was not going to obey God was the guy that violated and profaned the Sabbath on purpose. Verse 3, neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to the Lord speak, saying, the Lord hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, behold, I am a dry tree. Now these verses, I want you guys to think about this. For the deeper student, these verses refer to the new covenant era, when the Gentiles and others would enter into covenant with God. All right. Verse 4, for thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths and choose the things that please me and take hold of my covenant. Okay, remember what was part of the covenant? All 10 commandments. They were in the ark of the covenant. Verse 5, even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls a place and a name better than of sons and of daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. In the New Testament era, God says that the strangers and the eunuchs would have a better name in his house than his own sons and daughters because of doing what? Keeping the Sabbath. That's amazing. And the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. Even them will I bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be accepted upon mine altar. Again, in the Old Testament, the strangers and the eunuchs could not go up and offer offerings upon God's altar. Here they can, because we're speaking of New Testament times, spiritual sacrifices. For mine house shall be called an house of prayer for all people. Okay, it wasn't a house of prayer for all people until after Jesus came and paid the price. The veil of the temple was rent, and the wall of separation between Israel and Gentiles was removed. Okay? That gives us the time stamp. Because a lot of people will say, and we're going to get into this, that the Sabbath was just for Israel. It was just for Israel. I didn't lie to you. I was mistaken. There is one quick place we're going to go to. I think it's just two verses, one or two verses. Isaiah 66, verse 22. Now check this out. We just read some verses about the New Testament era, and the strangers and the eunuchs that kept the Sabbath would have a name better than the homeborn children of Israel. Verse 22, now we're going into the new heavens and the new earth. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass. This is in the future, not what happened in the past. It shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another. You see that? And from one Sabbath to another. That's the rhythm. New month, new Sabbaths. Months and weeks. Shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. So in the future, God is those are going to be the two main set times of worship. New month, new moons, when the moon just is dark and it's going to start going on the waxing phase where it starts lighting up, sort of like the sun rising and setting. The moon does that in its own way, but at night. But so those will be the two major set times of worship where people will come and meet together. Will be on new moon days and Sabbath days. Time is an interesting thing. You know, like I said in the last study, show me your calendar and I can show you what you prioritize. All right. Now, if you're somebody who, let's just say you're somebody who keeps the Sabbath, and they showed you their calendar and they had it blacked out Sabbath, nothing else was on that day, you would look at that and from your perspective, you'd say, okay, that person really means it. They really mean that they seek the kingdom of God first because it's blocked out. Now, and you look at other people's calendars, our calendars at times, we got all these other things blocked out, but church or Sabbath, they move around our set times, right? They move around our set times versus everything else moving around God's set times. I do have another verse here, verse 24. And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched. and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh, referring to those that violated the commandments of God. And by the way, Jesus did teach that. He did teach hell and suffering. We don't focus on that. You're not going to hear me. I'm not going to be yelling at you guys, scaring the hell out of you every Sunday. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You have to understand that it's there, because that's what is your initial motivation. I don't want to go there. I want to go there. I'm scared. I better start doing something right. And then after you've gotten past that fear stage, now you're in love with it. You can't help but want to do it. All right. So that's end of part 2 of our series on the Sabbath. We got at least a few more. There's a lot of good stuff yet to be, because I know there are still a lot of questions about the Sabbath and objections to it and all that. We will attempt to answer every single possible one that we can before we conclude this series. So we'll be right back with questions and comments. Be sure to join us live every Thursday morning, 9:30 a.m. for prophecy updates, and Sunday mornings, 10:30 a.m. for our line-by-line Bible studies. If you live near Princeton, Minnesota, and would like to join us in person for our Sunday morning church services, please email me at ben@christianovercomers.com for details and directions. Also, be sure to visit our website at christianovercomers.com to sign up for our weekly email updates, find our latest prophecy updates on video or podcast, catch up with our line-by-line studies, also available on video or audio podcast. And we even archive all of our studies by date. So if you have a phone or a tablet, bookmark this page so you can play our studies on the go while you're driving, going for a run, or doing chores. Now to our questions and comments. All right, welcome back. We will take questions and comments if we got any.
Yeah, I always have a comment or a question. And still, yeah, like you said right at the end there, I still have questions. It's just, I don't know why this is like hitting me in such a way, like, because I've known what the Sabbath is and Sunday, and it could be Saturday, but I don't think that matters as much whether it's Saturday or Sunday. Well, I'm sure a lot of people would disagree, but
yeah, we're gonna do a one study on that, the Lord's Day and the Sabbath, and we'll kind of explain why it went from Saturday to Sunday, and then kind of let people determine if that was right or wrong and so forth. But
I don't know, maybe there's scripture to talk more about that, but it doesn't seem like that was a huge deal. Like, did it on the wrong day,
Right.
But maybe it does. I don't know. We'll get into that.
Well, there were some very interesting reasons why they did it, and when you look at the type of, the Sabbath was a sign to differentiate Israel from the non-believing nations, and it appeared as though the early Christians at some point, maybe not right away in the book of Acts, at some point decided that they should keep the Sabbath on a different day other than the Jews, because the Jews were non-believers, so that the Sabbath would continue to be a sign. If you observed it, people would know that you're a Christian versus, are you a Christian or you're a Jew? And so we'll get into that. There's some really interesting stuff on that. But
yeah, so it just seems like, as of right now, it seems like on the Sabbath, all you're supposed to do is sit and read your Bible and pray. And not that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that I'm not seeing exactly what you're supposed to do on the Sabbath, other than give, and like you said, I honor God every day. I pray to Him every day. I try to read the Word every day. So on the Sabbath, it just means you do more of that all day. Or I don't know. I'm honestly not trying to be.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying.
Facetious or anything. It's interesting, because I always felt like just a day of rest, not like I need to take naps all day, but day of rest, day with your family. Even if that meant watching a sporting event or going out to eat at a restaurant or whatever. But now I'm like questioning all of that, like.
Right. And I think at the very end of this, if we determine that the Sabbath should be kept as a literal day, which I'm definitely, leaning way more towards that. But I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I mean, I've looked at both sides here and there, but I want to really exhaust it so that I can come to an educated conclusion. But I think if we do that at the very last study, I anticipate to be a study explaining what a typical Sabbath day would look like. What is the practical way to observe it? What are you doing? I could just say for a lot of Christians, it has been in general, just real quick, a morning service like we're doing right now, and then they'd maybe share a meal together and hang out, talk, and then maybe rest. Some people might take a nap, an afternoon nap or something, then they get up and they go fellowship again, either at another service or have dinner with the family. Or some people will decide they want to go read in solitude for, Sabbath. And some people like nature walks with their family, taking their family on nature walks. I would say that, we're talking about sports, right? I think there's a big difference between organized sports and just like, let's say I wanted to, right after Bible study, you guys leave and I say, hey, Jacob, let's go throw the football around. And I'm throwing the football with them and I'm talking about Scripture. That's totally different than a competitive game that you're involved with all these other people that are not equally yoked with us. You got some believers, some non-believers, nominal believers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not an equally yoked team thing. And it's not there's a difference between competitive sports and just enjoying a little bit of relaxation.
But then, then again, this is the word I used last time, and I tried to find a synonym for it, and I couldn't, but being legalistic, and what I mean by that is being overly legalistic. Like you just said, throwing the football with them and talking about scriptures. Well, what if you're throwing the football with them and you're just talking about how his week was last week? Is God really? It sounds like in the Old Testament he was really nitpicky. Like, I told you not to bundle sticks, and you did.
Yeah. Well, see, like I said, the Pharisee. This is what happens when the legalistic part of it is. So if I'm, just walking out there, my chickens need water, and it's hot out. They gotta get water, and somebody's watching me, seeing if I'm keeping the Sabbath right, and I pick up a stick and toss it out of the way. The legalistic guy would say he picked up a stick on the Sabbath
Right.
day. But I really wasn't like gathering a whole bunch of sticks, with the purpose of working really hard. It was very light. So it's that kind of stuff that the Pharisees did, and where they really wanted to catch somebody breaking something, and so they would find some loophole. Well, Jesus brought up some simple ones.
Yeah.
If somebody's ox falls into the ditch on the Sabbath day, it's going to take a lot of work to pull an ox out of the ditch, but you're not going to leave them there because it's the Sabbath day. But those things, and there were, like, Jesus did some healings on the Sabbath day, which the spirit of the Sabbath is all about healing, our physical body's healing and our mind. And so for Jesus to do healing on a day was literally doing what the Sabbath was intended to be done for.
As far as the sticks, that Philip Evans has something on there. Okay.
And I brought up the other one last week about the elevator. So the Jews today get really scrupulous about the Sabbath. They could literally just totally violate the Sabbath, but find a way to be not violating it by being technical. So I hear the elevators in New York on Saturdays, because that's when they celebrate their Sabbath. They don't want them pushing a button because that ignites a fire. That'd be starting a fire. It's electric shock, right? So what they do is they program the elevators to go up to every floor. So you could still use the elevator, but you can't push the button. You just have to step in the elevator because you're not lighting a fire. And now you got to go up to every floor, though, not directly to your
that
floor.
doesn't seem like God's way to me.
Yeah.
Just seems like a legalistic kind of.
Well, you're literally doing more. Think about this. You're literally it's more stress on your mind because now you got to stop at every single floor versus just touching the button. Yeah. But that's the big difference. the mockers and the scoffers, I believe they've stolen the Sabbath from us by making it seem as though a legitimate observance of the Sabbath is a pharisaical observance. And I think Satan's robbed us of this gift by saying, well, think about this. You know, if you want to discipline your kids and you want to keep them from doing things, sometimes you have to say, no, you can't do that. It's not good for you. When you're 14, you're not going to go hang out. You're not going to have a boyfriend and hang out in his bedroom with the door locked. Okay. You're not going to do that. So you say, no, you can't do that. But then somebody could come around, one of the friends would say, your parents are too strict, so that's what Satan attempts to, he did it with Eve, right? Did God really say you couldn't eat of every tree of the garden? I mean, come on, he's keeping things from you. But God knew that if they did, it meant death. So there are boundaries, but Satan always tries to make it, he wants us to think of those boundaries as evil restrictions. But there are the Pharisee way with the extra burdens, that's legitimate. You don't want to be a Pharisee. And so that's the hard part about being a sincere Christian is you don't want to, you don't want to obey God and then go to the extreme of not obeying him because you think you're obeying him type of thing by adding all kinds of extra stuff.
Part of the matter.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also, like, it's funny because they're saying Jesus violated the Sabbath. Jesus is the Sabbath. Whatever he's doing
Right.
is honoring God, so he could never violate the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Another quick thing was that I thought it was interesting, the blue ribbon thing, because I've always wondered where the ribbon thing came from. There's pink ribbons for breast cancer. There's, every color ribbon for everything. Just like, well, who invented that? And obviously it came from way back in the Old Testament when they had to put blue ribbon on their garment to remind them about what
The commandments.
the commandments.
That's interesting that you say that because I didn't think of the color. But when I have a book on it, I haven't gotten into it yet. But in America, there were laws that certain businesses couldn't be open on Sunday, and they called them the blue. I think they called them the blue laws. And I wonder if there's a connection there. I'm gonna have to search that out now. They say if there was a connection back to that scripture of the blue laws would be a reminder, keep the commandments. I wonder if there's a connection there. I'll have to.
Start keeping a blue ribbon in my truck or
Yeah.
just to remind me. Well, we got a couple things here. Philip Evans says, while they were in the wilderness, sticks were used to kindle a fire, and some believe that the commandment in Exodus 35:3 was temporal, i.e. while they were in the wilderness. But I don't know, he says, Exodus 35:3, ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. But I wouldn't risk it, he says.
Yeah.
So maybe, I think he's maybe saying that it was while they were in the wilderness that the whole kindle fire thing was important.
Right.
And maybe now that we're not in that situation.
Yeah, that'll be one of our studies upcoming because there was the 10 Commandments, which obviously they don't change, right? Jesus said, I came not to change one jot or tittle of the law. They're considered the moral law. Then there are a bunch of ceremonial laws. Now, ceremonial laws would be different religious rituals such as circumcision, different sacrifices. We know that Jesus fulfilled a great deal of those ceremonial laws, especially the sacrifices when he was nailed to the cross. So that'll be something we'll have to take into account, the difference of the kinds of laws. Ceremonial laws, moral laws, moral laws and ceremonial laws are the two major categories.
I'll jump down to DG2 and then I'll get back to Tulsi's next acts. Because there were no such names for days. They used numbers, day one and so on. It's the seventh day, not Sunday or not Saturday or Sunday, based on the true Enochian solar calendar, the Sabbath never changed. The Sabbath never changed.
Yeah, and those are all good points. Yeah, I mean the days. I'd prefer the days just to be called day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, because that's what God called them in creation. But yeah, like I said, there are some good points made about the Saturday was the original Sabbath, but there are also some interesting things that I want to bring up about the why Christians started observing the Sabbath on Sunday, which would be the first day of the week or the 8th day. And just I'll give a little bit of it up, but there's a lot more to this than this. But it was the day that Jesus resurrected on, right? So the resurrection day became the Christian Sabbath because it was the day that, Jesus, we're a new creation in him now because he resurrected. And they call it the Lord's Day. It was, his day, his victory, and now he's resting because he all that work on the cross, think about, okay, let's tie the two creations in together really quick. It took God 6 days to create the heavens and the earth. That was the original creation. Now Jesus came, and as the creator that he was the Word of God. Because the world fell into sin, he had to come and recreate it. Not literally like making water, separating the waters and everything, but spiritually doing all that separation, light from darkness and all that. And he did all that work while he was here on the earth, and more specifically, the most intense part of that work of bringing in a new creation was his road to the cross. And so upon, and some say, well, he was resting in the tomb on the Sabbath, but it's, there are some scriptures that suggest he may have been in hell, free and prisoner still, so still working, right? But his real rest would have been when he rose on the first day of the week. So that's why a lot of that's the most basic reason why. There's a bunch of other detailed reasons why they believe that since it's a new creation, there's a new Sabbath, and the new Sabbath would be the Lord's Day because that's the most significant day of all times is when Jesus resurrected.
Makes sense. And then Phil Evan does say starting one's vehicle kindles a fire.
What's that?
Starting a vehicle kindles a fire.
Oh, right.
So
Now,
does that still apply to us today, the fire thing? Because I guess there's a point there.
well,
You can't drive your car then.
I would say at the end of the day, I think we're going to be looking at the spirit of the law, right? Kindling a fire back in those days, you didn't have lighter fluid, you didn't have lighters. I mean, you would have to start it from scratch, not taking coals from another fire. You would have to be rubbing sticks together. And you could watch this on survival shows on YouTube. You can, it's real. You start fires by rubbing sticks. Okay. Or, stones and sticks. But that takes a lot of work because you once you get that spark or that little flame going, you got to continually just kind of build it up little by little, and you got to make sure it's all dry. That's a huge process to start a fire. And so, if I went out there now and we wanted to invite people over for Bible study, but we wanted a fire, I don't think I'm going to be saying, well, it says don't start a fire. If we're going to be talking about the Bible and our spirit is thinking about that, I don't see a problem with starting a fire on the Sabbath day. Yeah. But if I say, hey guys, we're going to have a Bible study fire today, it'll be ready in 3 hours, and I'm going to spend 3 hours of the Sabbath trying to get the fire going, then, I've just wasted 3 hours of the Sabbath, and I'm working really hard and tired.
Okay, so Tulsi's next X says, hi, Pastor Ben. I'm curious to know if you have advice for someone to obtain beef when things get rough. I know you do some homesteading, and I'm curious if you have ideas for meat-based dieters.
Well, I would say for meat-based, what we do, and we don't have a big farm. We don't have a farm. We have an acre and a half, but we're trying to garden as much as we can of it. And the rest we use, we raise our own chickens. So you can raise a lot of chickens. I think last year we raised 120 chickens, in just by moving them in like a mobile chicken tractor, and you move them to a new spot every day. So they're getting fresh bedding, fresh food, new spot. They love it. They go crazy when they get to the new spot. It's fun watching it. But I would say chickens. Do chickens if you don't have a big farm and you're not raising your own cattle. Start there. But then for beef cattle, I would say the next best thing would be to just find a local farmer. There's always, if you live by anybody who's a farmer, there's always people that are selling, beef. So try to get a friendship going with somebody who raises cattle.
Isn't that where you
And-
get your beef from a local farmer? Or you used to, or
We have, sometimes if we're in a hurry, we'll just get it at the
right?
supermarket. But there is a farm just less than a mile from here that we've gotten a lot of beef from. And
There's also deer.
Yeah.
Venison.
yep,
Turkey,
yeah. But you're limited on what you can hunt.
not me.
Don't say that. You're on Mike. They're going to be after you. I'm obligated to report you now. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Die or shoot something. I'm going to shoot something.
Yeah.
Right. But the numbers, if we're in that case, a lot of people would be thinking the same thing. So your numbers of deer are going to be down. And the pressure, once there's a lot of pressure when you're out deer hunting, it's hard to get them once
Hopefully
they're scared.
More vegetarians at that.
Yeah. But I would definitely say garden, and we're kind of newbies at it. I mean, we've done gardening for a couple years, but we're expanding big time this year. But chickens and growing your own food, I think, is the easiest way to start, and most people can do it if they have just a little bit of land. Unless your city prohibits you from having chickens, then that's another thing. But anything else?
I think one of the important things you said brought up the fact that by not doing the Sabbath, that your country, your area, your whatever is going to start going down, and being immoral and which is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I was a child, we had church in the morning, church at night, church
Yeah.
on Wednesdays, and we ate our meals, we prayed. I don't know how many people pray anymore before they eat.
Yeah.
Then we discussed things if we had any questions about God. And I just think that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that Satan has worked, as he does with all these things, has worked him way into the Sabbath. I mean, it doesn't have to be strict, I don't think. It just has to be a time that you're giving to God over any other idol.
Mm-hmm.
And you're representing, showing him your love.
Yeah.
And that day is basically going to be about him.
Right.
And family is about him. So I just think that's gone away. People just don't even think about it anymore.
Yeah. Well, you hear these. I hear some of these success stories of these guys that have been observing the Sabbath, and one guy in particular, they kick it off with a celebration every Saturday night. They'll have a big family dinner, and because the Sabbath technically starts at night. A lot of people do like most of their hard cooking. Like we try to do that as well. Cook the day before, and I'm still going to use the oven for stuff, but not do the, really hard, laborious food prep. Do that on the day before. But if you start it on the Friday before sunset, you can work as hard as you want for that. But it's a way that they kick off the Sabbath with their family. And it's just that set time for them where their family knows they're all going to be there. And it seems like the families that do that, all of their kids believe, and they just have, big families and extended families where there's just so much more joy and unity in the family when there's that set time. Because, let's face it, when you don't have a set time, those things get pushed to the side, that family time does. Because there's always something that you have to do, or you want to do. And so I would like I would love nothing better than when my kids get older, if we kept a certain meal every week together like that, like on the night of the Sabbath, for my kids and my grandkids, for it to just be just a wonderful, exciting time that we all look forward to. Yeah.
Above everything else. I mean, it's so easy to just get involved in the world when you don't keep that set
Mm-hmm.
at least a day, you know, and that's why he says it. You wouldn't say it if it wasn't important.
Well, yeah, and you know what's really interesting is our mind. So many people's minds, with with all this texting and phones and all that, YouTube videos, people's attention spans are very short today. And the beauty about the Sabbath is, God says it's a whole day, so you don't have all that interruption going on, that fragmented, this spastic stuff. Everything's got to be a little bite, It's that whole day where you get to relax. It's not just continually jumping from soundbite to soundbite. If I can only watch a 2-minute video, otherwise it's too long for me, kind of a thing. It's a time where people can just literally sit in and let their minds soak up, entire chapters, entire books of the Bible, without feeling like you can't. You stop thinking after 15 seconds.
That just brought up a good idea in my head that on the Sabbath nowadays, one thing that would be wonderful for me too, and everyone, and my kids, is you shut your phones off on the Sabbath.
Right. I have their phones. I locked their phones up last night. So I lock them up in my safe, and I'll give them back Monday morning.
I mean, that's huge. I didn't really even think of that, because
Yeah.
it's going to make me also, I'm guilty of it myself.
Yeah.
It makes, when you get that moment where you kind of, what should I do? Oh, I'll go check out my phone. So
Yeah.
now you won't have that crutch. You have to think about something else,
And you know what you find is interesting? When you do break the cycle of the never-ending,
Right.
and you do break it for one day and you put the phone away, all of a sudden now you're doing it less even during the regular week. And that's the beauty of when you're caught in this cycle and you never stop, you stay in it. And you don't even realize how maddening it is to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're just so used to it. You're like a slave
Yeah.
without a mind that just keeps going around and around and around.
Well, what an example to say, okay, anybody I know, I will not be available on Sunday because I'm honoring God.
Right.
I will pick you back up on Monday.
You just declared to them who you worship.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why the Sabbath is a sign,
And that's, I think that's what God means.
because anybody can say, I worship God every day, but then once you say, no, sorry, that's the Sabbath day, I can't do it. Now they're like, they really mean it. I mean, they're not just saying that, because anybody, you could say it and still, well, I brought up the story about that football player, all glory goes to God. That town's going to know my name next time I come into town. You know what I'm saying? You can say
hypocritical.
that you're doing it for the glory of God. And there literally are athletes that do stuff for God's glory. I'm not demeaning that. But there are some people that will just say it because it sounds cool or it sounds righteous. But really, they're seeking their own glory, their own fame. Yeah. But if you say, no, I'm not doing this on that day, who can question that?
Only call on emergencies.
Yeah. Right. Anything else? All right. Well, we will see you guys next time. Until then, stay in His Word every single day so that you can be a Christian overcomer. God bless.
Christian Overcomers is brought to you by the tithes and offerings of our listeners. If you would like to support our ministry, please go to ChristianOvercomers.com. God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of His terrible sword. His truth is marching on.